My wife didn't just betray me. She planned to erase me. She wanted my daughter, my fortune, and even my name, all with the help of the man I once called a friend. But the game they were playing had rules they didn't understand, because I wrote them. And before this ended, they would learn exactly what that meant. Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep it forced you to fight for everything that mattered? Share your thoughts below. Your story might remind someone that integrity can still win. My name is Ethan Kane. I'm 42 years old, and this is the story of how I turned the greatest betrayal of my life into a fight for truth, justice, and my daughter. I sat in the dim light of my basement office. The low hum of servers filled the silence around me. On one of the monitors, a high-definition video played in a loop. It was surveillance footage I had extracted from Melina's supposedly encrypted laptop. She sat draped across a velvet armchair in a lavish hotel suite, laughing as Daniel Reyes poured champagne into her glass. The soundless footage told me everything I needed to know. The way she tilted her head back, the way her hand lingered on Daniel's arm, the way Daniel leaned in, whispering something that made her smile like a woman who believed she'd already won. On her wrist was a diamond bracelet I hadn't bought. It glinted under the soft hotel lighting as she lifted her glass. Daniel's lips moved, and even without audio I could read the words. A new life. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my expression unreadable. 10 years of marriage reduced to pixels. Melina had always been ambitious, but this was more than ambition. This was calculation. I switched screens, pulling up a folder I had decrypted the night before. Each file a nail in the coffin of the life I thought we had built together. Encrypted text messages between Melina and Daniel scrolled across the monitor, their words cold, deliberate. Daniel wrote, "The prenup won't matter if we can prove he's been using company resources for surveillance. Your mother's connections will guarantee you full custody." Melina's reply was worse than anything I had prepared myself to see. "Luna barely knows him anyway. He chose work over family years ago. We'll make sure she understands that." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I had been betrayed before in my line of work. Colleagues selling confidential data, clients withholding truths. But this was different. This was personal. They weren't just cheating on me. They were rewriting my life, turning me into a villain in my daughter's eyes, erasing the years I had sacrificed to keep my family safe and cared for. I replayed Melina's messages in my mind, each word cutting deeper than the footage of her with Daniel. She wasn't just leaving me, she was orchestrating my destruction with the same precision she once used to close million-dollar real estate deals. My eyes drifted around the basement office, and for the first time, I really looked at my own home. Upstairs, the brownstone was filled with designer furniture. Melina had chosen art pieces she had hung, rugs she had insisted on importing from Italy. None of it reflected me. Not the man who had grown up in foster care, who had built his business from nothing, who valued function over flash. Even the family photos in the hallway had been arranged by her. Carefully curated moments that looked perfect, but felt hollow now. I wondered how much of our marriage had been genuine, how much had been performance for the world, for Daniel, for her powerful family. I turned back to the screen, my jaw tightening, not with rage, but with resolve. Rage was for amateurs, for people who reacted without thinking. I had built my entire career on never reacting, only acting with precision. If Melina and Daniel wanted to turn this into a game of strategy, they had chosen the wrong opponent. I switched off the monitor, the room falling into a deeper silence. My hands moved methodically, pulling a thick folder from the locked drawer of my desk. Inside were bank statements, property records, and investigative files I had been compiling for months, long before I even confirmed the affair. I had suspected something was wrong, and as always, my instincts had been right. Melina trusted me with everything financial. She had never paid attention to the details, never questioned the documents I put in front of her. That trust, the one part of our marriage she had never doubted, was about to become her most expensive mistake. I placed the folder on the desk, opening it to the first page. My reflection stared back at me from the glossy photograph clipped to the top. A picture of Melina and Daniel together at a charity gala months ago, smiling for the cameras while plotting my downfall behind the scenes. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of it all. The loss of the woman I thought I knew, the betrayal from a man I once called a friend, the threat to my daughter's future. Then, just as quickly, I buried it. This wasn't the time for emotions. This was preparation. And preparation was what I did best. I closed the folder, my expression hardening into the same quiet determination that had made me one of the most respected security consultants in the city. Melina and Daniel had made their move. Now it was my turn. Melina, my wife of 10 years, filed for divorce, citing my control issues and tendency to stalk and threaten. She demanded full custody of our 9-year-old daughter, Luna, the family home, and a significant portion of the tech company I had just IPO'd. But I knew I was being framed. By 2019, things had subtly, yet irrevocably, shifted. Melina's once effortless charm had become calculated, a tool wielded with chilling precision. She spent increasing amounts of time with people I didn't recognize, powerful investors, and elusive developers who seemed far more captivated by her presence than by the real estate projects she was supposedly pitching. She grew increasingly cold toward me, her warmth replaced by a brittle indifference. She frequently criticized my long working hours, her tone sharp with veiled resentment, as if she had conveniently forgotten that those very hours were what funded the meticulously curated, lavish lifestyle she so effortlessly enjoyed. I, ever the soldier of quiet dedication, tried to fight for our marriage with a steadfast, almost stubborn consistency. I initiated more family dinners, dedicating precious hours to coaching Luna's Little League team, and read bedtime stories to my daughter every night, even when exhaustion gnawed at me. But each gesture, each attempt to mend the widening rift, felt like throwing pebbles into the heart of a raging storm. By late 2020, even my closest friends, with their keen eyes for human behavior, began to notice the undeniable shift. One night, while grabbing a quiet drink with an old army buddy, I finally allowed a crack in my stoic facade. I admitted, with a weary sigh, I can track a threat from 2 miles out, dismantle an entire network with a few lines of code, but for the life of me, I can't figure out what's happening in my own home. What I didn't know then was that Melina's unchecked ambition was on the verge of crossing a line I had never imagined she would step over. The true turning point, the moment the pieces of the insidious puzzle began to snap into place, began on a quiet Sunday morning. I sat alone in my home office, the scent of old paper and digital machinery hanging in the air, methodically sifting through public records. Years of disciplined military intelligence work had hammered one immutable truth into my very being. Patterns never lie. Melina's sudden, inexplicable aggression in our marriage, the increasingly overt interference from her powerful family, and the almost smug, unshakable confidence she exuded these days were not random occurrences. There was a deeper play, an intricately woven conspiracy, and I was finally ready to relentlessly uncover it. The metaphorical smoking gun appeared, buried deep within a stack of sealed family court documents. I had acquired them through a private, highly discreet source who still owed me a significant long-standing favor from a forgotten past. As I scrolled through the scanned files, my jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath my skin. The case dated back 13 years. An incident involving Melina's formidable mother, Judge Patricia Harrison. The official record meticulously stated that Patricia had dismissed a drunk driving charge against a young political donor's son, citing insufficient evidence. But the truly damning sealed files told a chillingly different, unvarnished story. The driver had been Patricia's own nephew, His reckless, intoxicated speeding had resulted in a horrific accident, tragically killing an immigrant family of 4. Patricia's immense influence, her vast network of connections, had systematically buried the truth, shrouding it under layers of impenetrable legal jargon and sealed, coerced testimonies. I sat back, a cold dread seeping into my bones, staring at the screen. This wasn't merely an ethical lapse. This was systemic corruption, deeply entrenched and horrifyingly calculated. Melina had always, almost religiously, idolized her mother's unquestionable power within the intricate web of the legal world. But now that very power, that carefully constructed edifice, was a loaded gun, one I could aim in the right direction if I chose. I didn't stop there. For 2 relentless weeks, I quietly, meticulously built an ironclad case. I pieced together fragmented financial records, cross-referenced obscure campaign contributions, and analyzed hidden photographs. Gregory Harrison, Melina's seemingly innocent father, was revealed to be far from an unbiased bystander. A clear, damning paper trail connected him to strategic, well-timed donations funneled directly to the district attorney's re-election campaign just days after the Moretti case was so conveniently sealed. The Harrisons had painstakingly built their entire public image, their very legacy, on a foundation of unimpeachable integrity and unwavering family values. But I now held the irrefutable proof of the deep-seated rot festering beneath that polished facade. As I compiled the growing mountain of evidence, I remained rigorously methodical, devoid of any emotional bias. Every document was cross-referenced with painstaking detail. Every photograph was precisely time-stamped. Every financial transfer was verified by independent, unimpeachable records. I understood, with the clarity of a veteran operative, how fragile leverage could be if it wasn't absolutely airtight, and this case, this meticulously constructed trap, had to be bulletproof. By the time I was done, the file was thick, almost bulging, with undeniable, irrefutable proof. One anonymous call to the right investigative journalist or a well-placed tip to a federal investigator would systematically destroy the Harrisons' carefully cultivated reputation forever. But I wasn't reckless. I didn't want to publicly humiliate Melina in a fit of uncontrolled anger. Not yet. My ultimate goal was control, not chaos. So I waited, patiently, letting Melina and her smug lawyer make the first ill-advised move. That moment arrived sooner than expected. A week later, I sat directly across from Lawrence Keir, a high-priced, notoriously arrogant family attorney whose smugness was as polished as the conference table. Lawrence slid a thick, heavy packet across the gleaming dark wood with the kind of self-satisfied smile only men like him seemed to perfect. "Sign these," Lawrence said, leaning back in his plush leather chair, a picture of insufferable confidence. "Melina will retain full custody of Luna. She'll also keep the house, the vehicles, and a majority of your company's profits. It's in everyone's best interest to make this clean. Otherwise, we'll litigate aggressively, and I can assure you, Ethan, you will lose." I didn't flinch. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, or show a flicker of emotion. Instead, I simply picked up the papers, glanced at them briefly, almost dismissively, and then set them back down as if they were nothing more than junk mail, inconsequential and beneath my notice. My profound, almost unnerving calm unnerved Lawrence, who shifted slightly in his chair, a flicker of unease in his eyes, waiting for a burst of anger that never came. I reached into my sleek leather portfolio and pulled out a single, unmarked envelope, placing it neatly, deliberately on the table. My voice was quiet, measured, every word resonating with chilling intent. "Deliver this to your client." Lawrence's confident smile faltered, replaced by a deep frown, his hesitation evident for the very first time. "What is this?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Just deliver it," I replied, my gaze steady, unwavering. Tell Melina to read it before she decides how aggressive she really wants to be. Inside the envelope was a neatly organized, tightly bound summary of the Harrison family's darkest, most carefully guarded secrets. It included impeccably sourced copies of the sealed court records, damning financial statements meticulously tracing Gregory's illicit payments, and irrefutable photographs of Patricia meeting privately with the district attorney just weeks before the Moretti case was so conveniently dismissed. The implication was clear, unambiguous, and devastating. Push this divorce too far, and the Harrisons, with their carefully constructed facade of power and integrity, would lose everything they had spent decades building. I stood slowly, deliberately, gathering my things without another word. My profound, unnerving calmness filled the room like a palpable weight, a suffocating pressure that Lawrence could not shake. The veteran lawyer stared at the innocent-looking envelope as if it might, at any moment, explode, unleashing a torrent of destruction. As I walked out, my mind remained steadfast, intensely focused. For the first time in months, the balance of power had shifted, irrevocably and completely. Melina thought she had me cornered, my options limited, my spirit broken. But now every calculated move she made, every cunning maneuver, would have to account for the quiet, devastating storm I had just unleashed. The first frantic call came just after midnight. I sat in my study, the only sound the low, comforting hum of my laptop. Daniel Reyes's name flashed urgently across my phone screen. I let it ring, watching the light pulsate rhythmically until it finally stopped. A minute later, it rang again. This time it was Patricia Harrison, Melina's mother. I ignored that call too, leaning back in my chair with the same unshakable calm I had carried into Lawrence Keir's office earlier that day. The third call came less than 5 minutes later. "Patricia Harrison," I answered, my voice a low, steady rumble. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a practiced edge, but now, noticeably, it carried a tremor of genuine unease. Patricia was a master of intimidation, a formidable presence in the courtroom, but now her voice, usually so commanding, quivered perceptibly at the edges. I spoke evenly, my tone clipped, deliberate, each word chosen with surgical precision. "Justice." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. Patricia inhaled slowly, deeply, then exhaled with a measured deliberation, as if weighing every single word she was about to utter. "You think you can threaten me with half-baked accusations?" she finally retorted, attempting to regain her authoritative tone. "They're not accusations," I replied, my voice unwavering. "They're records, sealed court documents, financial transfers, photographs. You've spent years burying the Moretti family under layers of lies and legal obfuscation, but the truth is still out there. You know it, and now so do I." Patricia's voice, once sharp, softened, almost pleading, a hint of desperation seeping in. "What do you want, Ethan?" "I want 3 things," I said, without a hint of hesitation, my demands crisp and clear. "Melina withdraws the divorce petition immediately and signs full custody of Luna over to me. Daniel sells his share of the tech company I just IPO'd back to me at the original valuation, not the inflated extortionate number he tried to strong-arm, and you resign from the bench quietly, effective immediately, before the federal investigators get to you first." I paused, letting the profound silence amplify the weight of my next words. "Fail to do any of this, any single one, and the Moretti family finally gets justice. I'll make sure every single journalist in this city, every news outlet, has what they need to blow this wide open, to expose every sordid detail." Patricia didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken implications. When she finally spoke, her voice was strained, barely a whisper. "You're bluffing." My answer was calm, utterly decisive, leaving no room for doubt. "You already know I'm not." I hung up before she could formulate a response, leaving her in the deafening silence of her own crumbling world. By morning, the cracks in the formidable Harrison family's armor were already beginning to show, spreading like spiderwebs across a glass pane. I had sent no direct threats to the media, no overt messages. Instead, I had ensured that an anonymous tip, tantalizingly vague yet laced with compelling details about the long-buried Moretti case, landed squarely in the inboxes of 3 prominent investigative journalists. I also dispatched a carefully redacted version of the incriminating financial records to a discreet contact at the federal prosecutor's office. It wasn't enough to fully confirm the entire scandal, not yet, but it was more than enough to ignite a firestorm of questions that the Harrisons, with their carefully constructed facade of legitimacy, simply could not afford. Daniel Reyes was the first to panic, his carefully cultivated composure cracking under the immense, unseen pressure. By late afternoon, he left a furious voicemail on my phone, his voice cracking with rage and fear as he shouted that I was meticulously destroying everything. He called again an hour later, his tone now pleading, begging for a meeting, any kind of meeting. I didn't answer either call, allowing the desperation to fester. Melina's resolve, once so unyielding, broke next. She appeared at my office unannounced, her expensive designer jacket crumpled and askew, her usual poised composure utterly vanished. "You're ruining us," she accused, attempting to inject anger into her voice, but her trembling tone betrayed a deep-seated fear. "Do you even care what this will do to Luna?" I stared at her for a long, quiet moment, my expression unreadable, before finally answering. "I care about her more than anyone in your family ever has. That's why I'm doing this." By evening, the story had begun to grow legs, spreading like wildfire. News outlets subtly hinted at a long-buried judicial cover-up involving a respected judge, shrouded in whispers and speculation. Online forums buzzed with rampant speculation about corruption within the Harrison family, and for the very first time in her illustrious career, Judge Patricia Harrison conspicuously skipped her scheduled court session. She knew I wasn't bluffing, and she knew, with chilling certainty, that time was rapidly running out. The tension in Lawrence Keir's opulent office was suffocating, thick with unspoken dread. I sat at the far end of the polished conference table, my posture impossibly relaxed, a stark contrast to Melina, who sat stiffly across from me, her hands trembling visibly as she gripped a pen. The thick stack of documents piled before her represented everything she had relentlessly fought for: control, custody, vast wealth, and she was about to sign it all away. Lawrence, usually a paragon of arrogance and self-confidence, looked pale and acutely distracted, his gaze glued to the tabletop as if he wished to be anywhere but in that room. "Are we doing this or not?" My voice, calm and precise, cut through the oppressive silence like a sharpened blade. Melina glared at me, but the defiant fire in her eyes had been extinguished. Her mother had gone utterly silent after my devastating ultimatum. Daniel had refused to even show his face, vanished into the ether, and federal investigators had already begun making quiet, discreet inquiries into the Harrison family's labyrinthine finances. Every single advantage she thought she possessed had irrevocably vanished. She lowered her eyes, a flicker of defeat in their depths, and scribbled her name at the bottom of the custody agreement, then the business transfer, and finally the property settlement. Each signature felt like another brick meticulously pulled from the crumbling empire she had so desperately tried to build. When she finished, her hand still trembling slightly, she pushed the documents across the table. "You win," she said, her voice laced with a bitter, raw defeat. I didn't move to take them immediately. Instead, I leaned forward, my face unreadable, my gaze unwavering. "No, Melina, this isn't about winning. This is about truth." I paused, letting my words hang heavy in the air, allowing them to sink in with devastating clarity. "So before we finish, you're going to say it. You're going to tell me why you did all of this." She stared at me, her lips pressed tightly together, a desperate struggle warring within her. Lawrence shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing the impending, unavoidable truth, knowing precisely where this was headed. I remained utterly silent, waiting, my patience a tangible force. Finally, Melina slammed the pen onto the table, the sharp click echoing in the hushed room, and snapped. "You want the truth? Fine. You were never good enough for me," she spat, the words dripping with contempt. "I married you because you were useful, because you had money, connections, and a name people respected. But you were just a security grunt pretending to be something bigger. I outgrew you years ago." I listened, without flinching, without a single flicker of emotion. When she was finished, I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "And yet I just took everything you valued." Melina's face flushed a deep, angry red, but she said nothing. Her breathing was shallow, almost shaky, a tiny, fragile gasping for air. I finally gathered the signed documents and slipped them into my sleek leather folder. But before standing, I pulled out another, equally nondescript envelope and set it in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary, tinged with a fresh apprehension. "Consider it a gift," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. She opened the envelope, her fingers fumbling slightly, and then froze. Inside were photographs. Pictures of Daniel Reyes boarding a private jet with a woman half his age, their hands intertwined, a clear, damning intimacy in their posture. Another shot showed Daniel, his face grim, withdrawing large sums of cash from a Cayman Islands account registered in both his and Melina's names. A cruel, final act of betrayal. The final photo captured him lounging languidly on a yacht, a glass of champagne in hand, already celebrating his escape, a triumphant, mocking smirk on his face. Melina's hand trembled uncontrollably as she flipped through the devastating images, her eyes wide with dawning horror. This isn't real," she whispered, a desperate plea, though her voice cracked and broke with the crushing weight of undeniable realization. "It's real," I said evenly, my voice like cold steel. "Daniel drained the accounts 2 days ago. By now, he's probably in Monaco or some other tax haven, living it up. Whatever he promised you, Melina, it's gone, just like everything else you thought you had." Melina's carefully constructed composure finally, utterly shattered. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently, a muffled, guttural sob escaping her lips. For a long, agonizing moment, the opulent room was silent, save for the heart-wrenching sound of her quiet breakdown. Lawrence looked away, visibly uncomfortable, averting his gaze from the raw display of despair. But I didn't move. I simply stood, slid the folder securely under my arm, and turned toward the door. Without looking back, I delivered one last, cutting blow. "You wanted power, Melina. Now you have nothing left to fight for." I left her there, utterly broken, the signed agreements still on the table, and the crushing weight of her own choices far more effectively destroying her than anything I could have possibly said. The public reckoning came faster than even I, with all my foresight, had expected. Within a mere week of Melina signing the final binding agreements, Patricia Harrison announced her immediate resignation from the bench. The official statement she released to the press vaguely cited personal health reasons, a flimsy excuse that everyone knew masked the far darker, more inconvenient truth. The leaked court records, now undeniable and spreading like wildfire, had become a central part of a rapidly growing federal inquiry, and whispers about the long-buried Moretti family case had begun to dominate local news cycles, erupting into a full-blown scandal. What had once been a tightly controlled narrative of unimpeachable integrity and dedicated public service was now unraveling in real time, exposed for the systemic corruption it truly was. Gregory Harrison's sprawling hotel empire, for decades considered untouchable, an unassailable bastion of wealth and influence, became the next inevitable casualty. Federal investigators, now armed with my meticulously compiled, irrefutable evidence, quietly and efficiently froze several of his key accounts under suspicion of extensive money laundering and blatant campaign finance violations. Investors, spooked by the sudden public scrutiny, began pulling out their capital en masse, and stock values plummeted overnight, a financial domino effect. The Moretti family, their long-denied justice finally within reach, and now empowered by a formidable team of civil attorneys, filed a barrage of lawsuits that strategically tied up nearly every major Harrison asset. Decades of carefully cultivated influence, generations of accumulated wealth, were collapsing under the sheer, unyielding weight of the truth. And me? I hadn't spoken a single word to the media, hadn't issued a single press release. I didn't need to. The truth, once finally freed from its shackles, did its own devastating damage, a force more powerful than any orchestrated campaign. Melina's personal downfall was quieter, less public, but no less final or absolute. The forced divorce withdrawal and the crippling custody agreement had left her financially cornered, her options dwindling rapidly. Daniel's cold, calculated theft of their shared accounts, a final cruel twist of the knife, ensured she had no safety net, no cushion to fall back on. Within months, she was desperate, forced to sell her luxury cars, the symbols of her former status, and the few personal investments she still controlled, just to stay afloat, just to pay her basic bills. The high society invitations that had once defined her life, the exclusive galas and glittering parties, vanished without a trace. People who had once fawned over her, desperate for her attention or her family's influence, suddenly stopped returning her calls, their friendships proving as shallow as her ambition. Eventually, humbled and with few other options, she took a position as a mid-level real estate agent in a smaller, unassuming suburban firm. There were no charity galas to attend now, no luxury penthouses to boast about closing, just endless open houses on quiet weekends and meager commission-based paychecks. Occasionally, I would hear about her through mutual acquaintances, snippets of news filtering back to me. She was polite now, they said, almost deferential, even humbled by her spectacular fall from grace, though her innate pride still showed in the way she carried herself, a faint shadow of her former self. But for the very first time in years, Melina no longer possessed any real power to wield, any influence to exert. She existed on the edges now, far removed from the opulent, controlled life she had once sacrificed everything to attain and control. Daniel Reyes, however, was not allowed the luxury of fading into quiet obscurity. I had made absolutely sure of that through the intricate network of contacts I still maintained from my highly effective military intelligence days. I systematically provided federal investigators with detailed, irrefutable information about Daniel's convoluted offshore accounts and the extensive, fraudulent business transactions he had meticulously orchestrated. Within weeks, Daniel's remaining assets were swiftly frozen, and his name appeared prominently on a global international watch list. He became a ghost, fleeing frantically from country to country, but every desperate move he made only served to narrow his options further, closing the net around him. The woman he had fled overseas with, his co-conspirator in betrayal, abandoned him the very moment his illicit money became inaccessible, his usefulness extinguished. By the time the news outlets finally caught wind of his dramatic downfall, Daniel was unequivocally described as a fugitive, living a precarious existence in temporary rentals under assumed names, his once pristine reputation in both business and social circles utterly, irrevocably destroyed. I didn't celebrate any of it. No triumphant fist pump, no smug satisfaction. Sitting in my home office late at night, the quiet hum of the servers, a familiar comfort. I would sometimes allow myself to think about how easily I could have let my raw anger, my initial pain, dictate every step. How overwhelmingly tempting it had been to crush them purely out of revenge, to make them suffer as I had suffered. But this intricate, calculated operation was never about spite, never about petty vengeance. It had always been about balance, about ensuring that those who had systematically destroyed others for their own personal gain finally faced the commensurate consequences of their actions. The Harrisons had built their entire edifice of power and influence on a foundation of meticulously crafted lies. And now, those very lies had, like a virulent cancer, consumed them from within. For me, justice wasn't loud, wasn't a public spectacle. It was quiet, ruthlessly methodical, and devastatingly final. And for the first time in years, a profound, unburdened sense of peace settled over me. The dust hadn't fully settled when plot twist number 2 arrived, not as a thunderclap, but a quiet, almost hesitant ripple. One crisp autumn afternoon, a call came through to my secure line, an unknown number. I answered with my usual guarded efficiency. "Is this Ethan Kane?" A soft, yet firm, female voice asked. "Who's asking?" My tone was neutral, unyielding. "My name is Callie Vance. I used to know Daniel Reyes." I paused, a flicker of recognition in my mind. Daniel had briefly mentioned an ex-girlfriend, an analyst from a rival firm, dismissed as high-strung and overly emotional. I'd paid her no mind then. "What do you want, Callie?" "I heard what you did to Daniel," she stated, her voice tinged with a strange mix of admiration and bitterness. "Or rather, what you helped bring about. And I have more." "Daniel isn't just a cheat and a fraudster. He's a predator. He did things to me, to others, that were calculated. I have information about his offshore accounts, shell corporations, and more importantly, his manipulation tactics, things he used to control people, like Melina." I leaned back in my chair, suddenly alert. "What do you mean, like Melina?" Callie hesitated, then plunged in. "Daniel told me how he planned to get rich. He said he found a mark, your wife. He studied her ambition, her family's influence. He told her she was wasted on you, that he could give her real power, real wealth. He was grooming her, feeding her fantasies, all to get to your company's capital." She continued, her voice growing stronger, a simmering anger now evident. "He tricked her into thinking she was his partner. He even made her believe he was setting up joint offshore accounts for their future. But he was just funneling your money, Ethan, through her, and then directly into his own untraceable funds. He was going to leave her with nothing, just like he left me." This was the chilling revelation. Melina, for all her culpability, had also been Daniel's victim. Callie's words painted a picture of Daniel as a master manipulator, not just a simple adulterer. He hadn't just used Melina for her body or influence. He had systematically drained her own resources, preparing to cast her aside once he had access to my fortune. And then, the final, gut-wrenching detail from Callie. He even filmed their private conversations, intimate moments. He showed me, said it was insurance, to make sure she'd never turn on him if things went sideways. A cold wave washed over me. I had seen the footage on Melina's laptop of her discussing manipulating Luna, the staged assault. I had felt the raw, cutting edge of her contempt in Kier's office. But to think that she, too, had been a target, a pawn in a far more twisted game, by the very man she believed was her salvation, it added a new, horrifying dimension to the betrayal. It didn't excuse Melina's actions, but it explained the depth of Daniel's depravity. I spent the next few days meticulously verifying Callie's information. Her data, provided from a USB drive she mailed to me, a small, encrypted device, clearly not a corporate asset, was a goldmine. It contained a meticulously organized chain of messages, encrypted financial ledgers from Daniel's personal servers, and even copies of the illicit videos Daniel had secretly recorded of Melina. Callie, it turned out, had kept her own meticulous records, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her evidence was the missing link, painting a complete picture of Daniel's sprawling financial fraud and his systematic psychological manipulation. With this overwhelming new evidence, I didn't even contact Lawrence Keir or the Harrisons again. My game was over with them. My focus shifted to Daniel. I compiled everything: my initial findings, the court documents, Callie's trove of evidence, and the unredacted proof of Daniel's federal crimes, and submitted a comprehensive, anonymous package to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I knew the right channels, the exact protocols, the names of the agents who would act swiftly and discreetly. The wheels of justice, once set in motion with such precise force, ground swiftly. Within a week, the news broke. Daniel Reyes was arrested in a dramatic dawn raid at a luxury apartment he was renting under an alias in Miami. The charges were staggering: multiple counts of money laundering, wire fraud, and grand larceny, all stemming from the shell companies and fake investment funds he had used to siphon money, including those tied to Melina's supposed joint accounts. The revelation of his manipulation tactics and the existence of the private videos further fueled public outrage, though I ensured those particular details were handled discreetly by authorities, aiming for justice, not public humiliation for Melina. As for Melina, her fall was complete. Stripped of her social standing, her wealth, and her dignity, she had nowhere left to turn. The forced divorce withdrawal and the custody agreement, combined with Daniel's calculated theft, left her financially and emotionally destitute. With her powerful family now consumed by their own legal battles, she was truly alone. She finally left the city, not with defiance, but with a quiet, broken resignation. Before she departed, a heavy envelope arrived at my doorstep. Inside was a single, handwritten letter from Melina. The handwriting was neat, but the ink seemed to bleed faintly at the edges, as if tears had fallen on the paper. "Ethan," it read, "I heard about Daniel and about Callie. I see it now. All of it. I was so foolish, blinded by ambition and by his lies. I was wrong when I thought you were weak because you didn't react immediately. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything." There was no demand, no accusation, just a raw, unvarnished admission of her profound error. The last line was stark. "I'm sorry, Ethan, for Luna, for everything." It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from her. 3 months later, the world felt profoundly different for me. On a warm Saturday afternoon, I stood on the porch of my brownstone, leaning casually against the worn wooden railing, a picture of quiet contentment. I watched Luna, my precious daughter, chase a bright red ball across the sun-dappled backyard, her small figure darting with unbridled joy. Her laughter, bright and unburdened, filled the air around me, a pure melodic sound I hadn't heard so freely, so completely, in many, many months. She didn't understand the full, complex scope of what had truly happened, the intricate legal battles, the veiled threats, or the quiet, clandestine war I had waged to protect her from the darkness that sought to consume our lives. All she knew, all that mattered, was that her father had fought for her. And that, for me, was more than enough. Luna stopped, breathlessly, to catch her breath, her cheeks flushed with the innocent exertion of running, and waved enthusiastically to me. I smiled to myself, a soft, quiet pride settling warmly in my chest. This, I realized with absolute clarity, was why I had endured every sleepless night, every moment of agonizing uncertainty. This was why I had meticulously chosen strategy over blind rage, methodical action over impulsive revenge. I hadn't fought for vengeance. I had fought for this simple, precious, peaceful moment, bathed in the golden afternoon light. Life had shifted in other, equally significant ways, too. The tech company I had painstakingly built from the ground up, The very enterprise the Harrisons and Daniel had so greedily tried to strip from me was thriving once again, flourishing with renewed vigor. News of the Harrison scandal and Daniel's arrest, whispered through the rarefied air of the corporate world, had ironically served as an unexpected catalyst. Clients who had once hesitated to sign with me, wary of my low-profile approach, now lined up for contracts, drawn by my unassailable integrity and ruthless effectiveness. My reputation, already solid within my specialized field, was stronger than ever, forged in the crucible of adversity. I had expanded my operations, hiring a new team of trusted former colleagues from my intelligence days, and I found myself turning down more lucrative work than I accepted, a testament to my renewed success. But I no longer buried myself in it, no longer lost myself in the endless pursuit of profit, not in the way I once had. Late nights spent staring at security feeds, analyzing data, had been thoughtfully replaced with warm, boisterous family dinners, engaging school projects with Luna, and quiet evenings patiently teaching her how to throw a baseball, the simple joys of fatherhood. I had also, profoundly, learned to let go of anger. I could have pursued the Harrisons further, could have systematically ensured every last vestige of their influence was utterly destroyed, their names forever synonymous with scandal. But I had already accomplished what mattered most, what truly brought me peace. Patricia was disgraced. Her judicial career ended in ignominy. Gregory's once unassailable empire was under relentless scrutiny, crumbling from within. Daniel was a hunted fugitive, living a life of desperate anonymity. And Melina was no longer a threat, no longer a poison in my life. She was just another person, one among many, trying to painstakingly rebuild from the ruins of her own catastrophic choices. Inside my office, a single photograph remained on the shelf, a silent, poignant sentinel. It was a picture of Melina and Luna, taken years ago, back when we were still, in some semblance, a family. I kept it not out of lingering love or a nostalgic yearning for a lost past, but as a stark, ever-present reminder. Trust, I had learned through bitter experience, was not something to be given away freely, not a gift to be bestowed without thought. It was something to be earned painstakingly, carefully, and never, ever taken for granted. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the lawn, I stepped off the porch and joined my daughter in the yard. Luna tossed me the baseball, her eyes bright with expectation, and cheered with pure delight when I caught it easily, a simple, perfect moment. For the very first time in years, I felt like the ground beneath me was solid, unyielding, a stable foundation after years of shifting sand. My life wasn't perfect. No life ever truly was. But it was profoundly mine, earned through immense patience, untold sacrifice, and a quiet, unshakable determination to protect what truly mattered most. They thought his silence was fear, but sometimes silence is the scariest sound, for it is the sound of someone waiting for the final blow.